Robert François Damiens, 28th March 1757. Robert François Damiens was born on 9th January 1715 in a small village near Arras, northern France. He enlisted young, left the army, drifted through a dozen jobs as a domestic servant, and was fired from every single one for theft, drunkenness, or violent outbursts, until even the Jesuits in Paris nicknamed him Robert le Diable, Robert the Devil. By early 1757, he had become quietly obsessed with the Jansenist controversy. The French clergy were refusing sacraments to anyone who supported Jansenist ideas, and Damiens convinced himself the king was ultimately responsible. On the afternoon of the 5th of January, he walked past the guards at the Palace of Versailles, drew a short folding penknife, and pushed it between Louis XV's ribs as the king stepped into his carriage. Thick winter clothing saved Louis. The blade barely penetrated a centimeter. The king thought he had been punched, bled a little, called for a confessor just in case, forgave his imaginary mistresses, and lived another 17 comfortable years. Damiens stood there calmly until the Swiss guards seized him. Torture produced no accomplices because there were none. The Parlement of Paris condemned him as a regicide, the first attempted regicide in France since Ravaillac killed Henry IV in 1610, and revived the full medieval penalty that had been gathering dust for a century and a half. They began the night before in a stone chamber beneath the conciergerie. The boots were clamped around each shin, 2 flat boards held by iron rings, and 8 wedges were hammered in one after another until the bones cracked like green wood breaking in a fire. Damiens is supposed to have looked at the torture and said only, "La journée sera rude." At dawn on 28th of March, he was led shirtless into the Place de Grève. First, the right hand, the one that held the knife, was laid on an anvil while burning sulfur was poured over it, until the skin blackened, blistered, and peeled away in long strips. Then the red-hot pincers started their slow journey. Chest, arms, back, thighs, calves, 6 separate places, each bite immediately followed by molten wax, molten lead, and boiling oil poured straight into the open wounds. 4 enormous Normandy horses were harnessed to his limbs with thick ropes. The signal was given. The horses strained. The joints refused to part. Charles-Henri Sanson, the royal executioner who would one day guillotine Louis XVI, stepped forward with a broad knife and calmly severed the tendons at shoulder and hip. Only then did the horses find purchase. The right arm tore away first with a wet, ripping sound, then the left leg, then the right leg, then the last arm. The torso was still breathing, still moving slightly, when they lifted it onto a low pile of logs and set it alight. Some witnesses standing closest swore they heard faint words, prayers or pleas, until the flames finally reached the chest. When everything was reduced to ash, the remains were shoveled into the Seine so that no particle of Damiens could ever rest on French soil again. His house was demolished brick by brick, his wife and daughter banished for life, his father and siblings ordered to change their names by law. France never performed another public quartering. Gheorghe Dózsa, 20 July 1514. Gheorghe Dózsa, sometimes recorded as Gheorghe Dózsa in Romanian chronicles, was a Secoli man-at-arms from Transylvania, respected enough to be chosen in early 1514 to lead a papal crusade against the Ottoman Empire. The promise of full indulgence drew almost 100,000 peasants, townsmen, Slovaks, Rusins, Romanians, and Serbs. By May, the crusade had turned into the largest peasant revolt Hungary had ever seen. Dózsa's camp at Cegléd became the center of a storm that swept the central counties. Manor houses burned, nobles were impaled on their own gates, bishops dragged from cathedrals, church bells melted down for cannon. His proclamations grew darker by the week. He suspended entire noble families from gateposts, ordered wives and children killed in front of their husbands, and declared himself the only true king of the common people. The nobility panicked, the papal bull was revoked, and a professional army was raised under John Zapolya and Stephen Bathory. On 15th July, outside the fortress of Timișoara, The peasant host was annihilated by heavy cavalry. Dózsa was wounded several times, unhorsed, and taken alive. 5 days later, an iron throne that had been heating on a bed of coals since dawn was carried into the fortress square. An iron crown and iron scepter glowed dull red beside it. Dózsa was stripped naked and forced down onto the throne. Skin fused instantly to the metal, tore away, fused again. The crown was hammered onto his head until blood ran from beneath the rim. The scepter was pressed into his palms until flesh welded to iron. 9 of his lieutenants, deliberately starved for days, were marched forward in a line. Red-hot pincers began tearing long strips from Dózsa's chest, arms, and thighs. Each strip was offered to the prisoners. "Eat your leader's flesh and live." Most obeyed, chewing and swallowing while he watched. His younger brother, Gergely, refused and was hacked to pieces first, so Dózsa could see every blow. No contemporary account agrees on how long consciousness lasted. Some say until the crown finally cooked through the skull, others that the screaming stopped long before the body was quartered, and the pieces sent to the 4 corners of the kingdom as a warning. 70,000 peasants were tortured or killed in the weeks that followed. The laws passed the next year by the Hungarian Diet locked serfdom in place until 1848. Emperor Valerian captured spring 260 c. E. Publius Licinius Valerianus was born around 195 CE into an old senatorial family, rose through the usual posts, and was proclaimed emperor by his troops in 253 at the age of 58. Rome was already deep in the crisis of the 3rd century. Plague, civil war, endless invasions from north and east. Valerian took the eastern half, sent his son Gallienus to the west, and spent 7 years trying to hold the line against the new Persian king, Shapur I. In spring 260, his army was trapped near Edessa, half dead from plague and starvation. He rode out under a flag of truce to negotiate. The meeting was a trap. Persian cavalry closed the circle. The entire Roman column was captured without a single sword drawn. Valerian became the only reigning Roman emperor ever taken alive. Persian court records are unusually proud of what happened next. Valerian was kept in golden chains at Ctesiphon. Whenever Shapur wished to mount his horse, the former emperor was forced onto all fours so the king could step on his back. Roman sources later tried to dismiss it as propaganda. Persian victory reliefs at Bishapur show it carved in stone anyway, the great king standing triumphant on the neck of a kneeling man, wearing the Roman imperial cloak. Valerian lasted 3 or 4 years in captivity. When he finally died, probably of disease or something quieter arranged in a cell, Shapur ordered the body flayed. The skin was scraped clean of fat, dyed scarlet with vermilion, stuffed with straw, and hung in a temple as a permanent exhibit. Roman ambassadors were still taken to see the red skin a full century later. Rome never managed to bring it home. Balthazar Gerard, 14th of July, 1584. Balthazar Gerard was born around 1557 in Franche-Comté, studied law at the University of Dole, and became obsessed with Philip II's 1580 decree offering 25,000 crowns, a noble title, and hereditary estates to whoever killed William the Silent, leader of the Dutch revolt. In July 1584, he talked his way into the Prinsenhof at Delft, bought 2 wheel-lock pistols, and on the 10th shot William twice at point-blank range on a narrow staircase. William collapsed and died within seconds. Gerard ran for the side gate and the moat where a horse and a pig's bladder float were waiting. He tripped over a heap of rubbish and was caught. He stayed calm, almost joyful. He believed he had purchased paradise. The sentence was read aloud the next morning and deliberately stretched over 4 full days. Right hand to be burned off with a heated iron, flesh torn with red-hot pincers in 6 different places, quartered and disemboweled alive. Heart ripped out and thrown in his face. Head struck off last. Day 1, he was whipped until the ribs showed. Wounds smeared with honey. A goat brought in to lick them raw, with its rough tongue. The goat refused. Day 2, he was hung by the wrists with 300-pound weights on each big toe for half an hour at a time. Day 3, he was fitted with shoes of fresh, oil-soaked dog skin, 2 fingers shorter than his feet, and placed before a fire, until the leather shrank and cooked the flesh inside. When the shoes were finally cut away, most of the skin and several toes came with them. His armpits were branded. Alcohol poured on the burns. Long nails driven beneath every fingernail and toenail. Day 4. The public execution began. The right hand was burned away first. Pincers tore 6 fist-sized chunks of flesh. Quartering followed. Witnesses say he never screamed. When the still-beating heart was torn free and flung into his face, he only muttered, almost surprised, that it was colder than he expected. Peter Stumpp, 31st October, 1589. Peter Stumpp, sometimes spelled Stubbe, or Stumpf, was a prosperous farmer near Bedburg in the Rhineland, a widower with 2 children. In 1589, during the Cologne witch panic, he was accused of being a werewolf. Under torture, he confessed to practicing black magic since he was 12, receiving a belt from the devil that turned him into a wolf with huge teeth and glowing eyes, killing and eating 14 children, including his own son, whose brain he described as a dainty morsel, devouring 2 pregnant women and ripping their fetuses from the womb, to eat their hearts raw, committing incest with his daughter Beal, and coupling with a succubus sent by the devil. The belt was never found. On 31st October, his teenage daughter Beal and his mistress Catherine were brought to the market square first. They were strangled, flayed alive, and burned. Then Stumpp was strapped to the breaking wheel. Red-hot pincers tore 10 pieces of flesh from his body, slowly enough for the crowd to count each one. His arms and legs were smashed with the blunt side of an axe head, so the shattered limbs could be threaded in and out of the wheel's spokes like ribbon. Only then was he beheaded. All 3 bodies were burned together on a single pyre. Over the ashes, the authorities raised a tall warning pole that stood for decades, the execution wheel at the top, a carved wolf beneath it, and Peter Stumpp's severed head on a spike at the very top, looking down forever on the village he supposedly terrorized. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss the next uploads.